panel discussion is on the business perspective. So I hope Andrew Scott is here. I know I see some others, Sergey and Stephen are here. So what I might do just until Andrew joins and John Godfrey is just to ask Stephen and Sergey to start the discussion. So Stephen, why don't we start with you, because I know you're phoning in very, very late from Australia. So why don't we let you go on first, just to give your perspective on healthy longevity and the business community's response in terms of the COVID experience to date and the role of business. Over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Tina, and thanks for putting this together. Fantastic session. Yeah, so Andrew and the team were talking about a few sort of highlights of where we're seeing the impact of COVID, and I was going to make a few comments from a sort of entrepreneur startup perspective, and also from a global perspective, sort of being here in Melbourne, but having 127 chapters around the world, we have a pretty decent sense. I did just say a couple of big themes that are jumping out. First, I think it's real. It's an accelerant and a decelerant, and specifically it's accelerating aging in place as one of the big trends. We've been seeing some big deals and some big checks being cut. For example, just in the last few weeks, we've seen companies like Home Thrive get 20 million, Papa get 20 million, both of those that are keeping people in their homes, helping with social determinants, connecting people with the local communities. Heal and Amwell up 100 million, 200 million respectively. So there's some real serious cash from the venture side going into support models that are working to keep people independent and sort of pushing away, recognizing, frankly, the dangers of hospitals as COVID hubs and trying to kind of keep people in their homes. There's also a push around the digital divide that's, I think, become crashingly important as we've all experienced the impact, or many of us have experienced the impact of being isolated and disconnected. I was speaking to Tom Camber the other day from Oates Senior Planet in New York, and he was saying that still 42% of older people in America still don't have a wired connection for internet in their homes, and there's still something like a expectation that high-speed broadband is at 10 or 10 megabit download speed. So there's some real push now to create new mechanisms and models for crossing the digital divide, and we're seeing a bit more variety around new interfaces, experimenting with voice, experimenting in particular around cashless. Cashless has been a big challenge with COVID because a lot of people have been asking people to go cashless, but it can be a challenge, in particular for older people. So we're seeing a lot of innovations, and frankly, China is the place to go to watch. With 900 million mobile users, mobile payments, sort of just watching what they're doing is really interesting. So I sort of say I'll leave it there for now because I know we'll have a discussion with the others.
I have a few questions.
An accelerant of these big trends, in particular, aging in place and digital divide.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephen. Of course, Stephen runs the incredibly successful network called Aging 2.0 and the collective associated with that. So thank you so much, Stephen. You've been such a huge force in the longevity community. So I'm going to hand over, Andrew Scott is due to join us any second now, but I'll just hand over to Sergey and then to John. Oh, he's there. Welcome, Andrew, you're here. I'll hand over the chair role to you, Andrew. Do you want to step in and say hello?
Yeah, thank you, and apologies. I'm sure at some point we'll talk about how the COVID has helped older people get used to digital technology, and here I am joining a little bit late, but not sure what conclusions to draw from that. But thank you, Tina, and thrilled to be part of this panel. We've got three great contributors. At the time, I won't read out their impressive backgrounds, but what I would like to ask, we heard from the previous group how COVID, if anything, sort of accelerated some of the scientific insights and the scientific urgency around this agenda. I wonder from a business point of view whether we can say the same. Stephen was obviously talking about accelerants and decelerants, but perhaps I can throw that open first to you, John, because Legal and General Course are really sort of focusing on this space, and I wondered how you saw it.
Yes, Andrew, it absolutely has upped the pace of business focus on health and healthy life expectancy. And we knew this was important before. And if you just look at what McKinsey have concluded as far back as 2017, they were saying that a healthy global population versus an unhealthy population accounts for a difference of sort of 15 to 17% of global GDP. So we know that health equals wealth. What I think has happened here is that it has proved absolutely beyond doubt through COVID that you can't have a healthy economy without a healthy population. So we need to look very urgently at a whole series of sectors. How elderly care operates is one. Clearly, there are opportunities in health and healthcare and technology, and accelerate the science and turn that into viable economic opportunities as well as scientific opportunities. We need to look at housing, and we need to look at how urban design works, for example, and again address these inequalities that have been absolutely demonstrated through COVID about the way we live and the type of concentration of populations in cities and the massive differences in healthy life expectancy across different income groups. So it has all become much more urgent, I believe. And I think we need to make another step actually beyond acknowledging the urgency. And that is to say that, health for business is not a cost to be borne. It's actually an opportunity to be seen as a prospect for future growth, because healthy people are better economic actors, frankly. They're more productive, more likely to be in the workplace, better at doing what they're doing when they're there. You have a wider talent pool to choose from in a healthy population. And they also live longer, consume more goods and services, and basically contribute to the economic growth we all need. So I think this has been a real wake-up call. Some of us recognized it already, but this should accelerate absolutely the way that business sees the importance of health and healthy longevity.
So I completely agree. As an economist, I came into this by the curious idea that if we're living longer and healthier for longer, why be so pessimistic about the economy? So I completely agree with that. I also think that aging society narrative that we should be just looking at products for older people misses what I think is the really big market, which is that people are going to really value products that help us, or services that help us age better. And that's it's an enormous market, I think, compared to simply just catering for the needs of older people. But Sergey, you're looking at things from an investor point of view. John was saying it's become more urgent. Are you seeing either from the flow of prospects to look at, or from investor money coming in, that COVID has accelerated things?
Yeah, obviously, COVID is a huge wake-up call for all of us, including investor community. So we see a lot of support for biotech sector overall. But what I like in terms of business engagement, I think we've seen very important paradigm shift. In overall how business approach the health, longevity, and the current crisis. We see a lot of new players coming in, specifically, big tech companies like, Apple, Google, Amazon. So I'm very positive about the way we can change the whole healthcare paradigm with the arrival. Former enemies, say market competitors like big pharma, are joining their forces in partnership. So that's a great and enormous change in paradigm. Or, some of the players are using completely different principles, like Alex Javaronko from previous panel, and he's in Silicon Medicine, use data in a very open way. So immediately, after they discovered certain targets, which can be helpful as a potential medication for COVID, they immediately publish that. So there's so many changes that I can see from the business perspective. And obviously, it does have implication on our ability to invest and therefore develop this space.
Interesting. And, what I think there's always a danger with these meetings is we end up sort of talking our book, literally me talking my book, by the way. But, you know, we're all agree it's important. We thought it was important before. Everyone, you know, COVID's a multidimensional shock. Everyone's saying, oh, the whole thing I talked about beforehand is even more important now. So I guess the question is, are we really going to start to see changes in corporate behavior and government policies as a consequence? And I wonder, and I perhaps bring Stephen in here, is the real shock here is that certain, you know, if the system starts to fail as it started to do with COVID and people are pushed outside of the system, whether that's where we're going to start to see the innovation actually happening, whether companies are going to be so stressed in the coming recession that actually their ability to support healthy, longer workers will be harder, and therefore people will be pushed out of the standard corporate world and will start to be innovative. Stephen, I wonder what you're seeing from your point of view. And by the way, please do put in the questions, because these people are great and you should get me to ask them some questions.
Yeah, system sort of shocks right now is pretty, I think, relevant for many countries, and I think the US in particular is probably a special case in terms of system shocks. I think one of the most wonderful gifts, if it can be put like that, of a silver lining from the pandemic would be if we can have a really hard conversation in the US about the entire concept of employer-driven health insurance, which actually connects this quite a lot, because there's a lot of people, I think, from an entrepreneurial perspective, who are sort of hovering at the edges, thinking about jumping in and actually doing something meaningful and innovative, but actually are stuck. And I think this is a huge opportunity for Europe with the safety net piece, which I think is often not really included in the conversation around entrepreneurship here, where you've got perhaps, you know, middle to older age workers who are trying to kind of maintain and build up their pension pot before they, you know, get too far, get too much older, but then they don't sort of have that same entrepreneurial vim. And I do think that Europe has an advantage here in terms of the healthy aging hub, and to do things in a systematic way could be quite an opportunity there. I think Europe could potentially connect some of the dots that we're seeing the US struggle with right now.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think we're going to see, and clearly we're going to see a fall in employment because of COVID, and we kind of know it's going to affect disproportionately the young and the old. So I do think that is a space where we need support. So I'm going to ask, while we're waiting for questions, each of you perhaps so one thing from the John with his corporate hat on, Sergey with the investor, and Stephen the entrepreneurial. You know, we talked about it to become more important. We talked about things beginning to bubble up. What is the sort of one thing that each of you feels from those perspectives that is most important to do in, let's say, 2021, as hopefully we start to see COVID more as a backward rather than a forward-looking thing? John.
Well, yes, I'll start off, Andrew. You know, I think we can take a lesson in a sense from what's happened around climate, because I do think that we are roughly where the climate debate was 15, 20 years ago. And, you know, it's the preserve of a sort of interested but small group. Business largely sees this as a cost, not an opportunity. That has suddenly changed. And one of the things we've really done in the business world is focus on the metrics and the deliverables about climate. So when people talk about a post-COVID recovery next year being investment-led and build back better is the great phrase, people tend to think about carbon reduction and an infrastructure investment. We need to have the parallel to that going on in health. So let's measure and target what it is we want to do, what are the concrete steps to get there, and actually have a build back better movement which improves population resilience and population health.
Sergey? Sergey, do you want to comment on this?
So I'm actually delighted to see the degree of change in regulatory framework. I mean, look at what regulators all around the world done with testing, with supporting vaccine development and trials as well. So what I would love us to see, you know, in 2021 is the same degree of regulatory innovations, which I think is super important, you know, on all fronts, including recognition of aging as disease or as a risk factor, which I think will bring a huge boost to collective effort to make this change.
And Stephen?
I think there's going to be a real shift away from these hubs that we had in the past that were sort of talent hubs, for example, Silicon Valley, and flourishing of alternative centers. And I would be interested in if longevity ecosystems can start to flourish. So, for example, in Lisbon, they're developing a quite interesting new blueprint around longevity innovation. And so being unmoored by the traditional metrics of where you have to be and whether you have to be in an urban setting or a rural setting, I think there could be some really interesting new longevity innovation ecosystems in all sorts of interesting locations.
Interesting. Now, I've been looking at a few, we're running out of time, of course, but we've got a few questions coming through and we'll try and combine them. They're sort of looking at prevention versus cure. They're also about measurements, but to me, what's been interesting about this debate of corporates is, there's two parts to corporates. There's the firms, there's the products they provide, and then there's the way they look after their workforce. And the conversations are broadly focused upon products. Of course, the really key thing in 2020 is corporates trying to look after their workforce and maintaining their health. So what do we think about that dimension for 2021? What can be done there? John, I'll hand over to you.
Sorry, just trying to unmute myself there. How we look after our workforces. What we had a few years ago was quite a sea change in the way that most employers looked at, for example, mental health in the workplace, which shows that business can move quickly once it's sort of mandated to do so. And what convinced big employers around mental health in the UK was to quantify the value that is lost through not addressing this. That was the Stevenson Pharma report. It was sort of 35-40 billion pounds worth of lost productivity. So it's in our interest to look after the workforce. Part of it is about office design. Part of this actually is built in to designing how we can work more flexibly, because I don't think for a lot of firms, the workplace is going to be the same after this as it was before. Now, there are some things you can only do in place, but there is quite a lot of work that people will do remotely, and that has its pros and it has a few cons, but flexibility would appear to be the answer. So we have to design the right protocols, the right systems to facilitate that type of working. It's something that we're working on right at the moment. It's easier to shut an office than it is to reopen it in a flexible and sensible way that works for all your employees. That requires a lot more thought. So I think that's the first thing.
Thank you, John. Sergey, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think in addition to what John mentioned, I think there's a much bigger role of wearables as a technological solution to bring, health and predictive version of medicine and healthcare to the workforce. Look at the things that Vitality UK is doing, right? It's just simple use of Apple Watch, or it shouldn't necessarily be Apple Watch, right? You can use Fitbit, Halo, any other wearables can significantly change and be a driver for change in terms of ours and corporations taking care of workforce. So that's completely different technological setup, which open up the opportunity.
And Stephen, what's best for longevity? Flexible working in a firm or being a self-employed entrepreneur?
I think there needs to be a reason that you go to the office. Right now, a lot of people, if you have a choice, would prefer not to. I think we're going to see a big growth or an explosion even in the new kind of environmental cleanliness and hygiene opportunities. I did some work a couple of years ago for a hotel chain, and the older population, that was their number one interest in a hotel brand, was the hygiene. And I think now we're seeing some new interesting sort of biogenomic analysis and assessment of environmental health in a way that companies are going to have to be able to prove that they can maintain hygiene in a way that is attractive to their workforce.
I'm going to have to call a close to it now because we are running out of time. The challenge of longevity, of course, is it literally covers every aspect of life at every age. So it's such a deep thematic issue, which also I think makes it hard to locate it in any one particular area. But thank you. I think what you've really brought to the fore is, first of all, that there's a growing economic and financial need that firms will need to seize both for their products and their workforce. But also, of course, we can't expect corporates on their own to do enough, and not all of them to be as socially conscious as we would like. But that the rights and obligations, whether from regulation or culture, are surely going to increase as a consequence of COVID, which I think will create this feedback loop. So thank you. Tina, I'm going to hand back to you. Hopefully I can exit the video easier than when I joined.
Well done, and thank you so much, Andy, for being patient and persistent. We managed to get there in the end. Just shows how technology is, we rely so much on it to work well.